I came home from a fishing trip to a pile of dirt and splinters where my wife's roses had been. My daughter-in-law was standing there with a contractor, pointing at the ground where she wanted her new patio. She had torn out 30 years of memory, every bush my late wife had planted and cared for, without asking, without a word. But when the backhoe bit into the earth, it struck metal. It hit the fireproof safe my wife had buried beneath her favorite white rose, a secret she kept for me. That garden was my wife Alina's sanctuary for 3 decades. Every rose had a story, a memory she tended like a second child. To see it bulldozed for a patio was an erasure I couldn't comprehend. But the safe, left untouched in the earth, held a different truth. Inside were documents, jewels, and a letter addressed only to me, and what it revealed would unravel the very reason she wanted it gone. My name is Robert. I'm 68 years old, a retired structural engineer, and for the last 5 years, I've been a widower living in the house my wife Alina and I built our life in. We moved here 40 years ago, a young couple with a blank slate of a backyard. Alina, she was a botanist by training but a poet at heart. She said a house needed a soul, and a soul grew from the ground up, so she planted her roses. She started with a single Charlotte Armstrong, a deep pink hybrid tea, the first anniversary gift I ever gave her. And over the next 30 years, that garden became her masterpiece. It wasn't just a collection of plants. It was a living calendar. The new dawn climber by the arbor bloomed for our son Michael's birth in June. The white iceberg roses were for our 20th anniversary. The deep crimson Mr. Lincoln was planted the year she beat her illness. Every bush had a story, and she knew every one by touch, by scent, by the feel of its thorns. After she passed, the garden became my responsibility and my tether. I am not a natural gardener. I understand load-bearing walls and stress coefficients, not pH balances and pruning schedules, but I kept her notebooks. I followed her precise, looping handwriting, fertilized Lady Hillingdon first week of April, watch for black spot on Queen Elizabeth after rain. It was my way of still talking to her, of keeping her world alive. My son Michael is 38. He married Chloe 4 years ago. I'll be honest, at first I was relieved. Michael had always been quiet, a bit adrift. Chloe was all energy and plans. She was an interior designer, and she had strong opinions about everything, which at the time I mistook for passion. She redecorated their condo within a month of the wedding. Then she started on our family dinners. The way I set the table was wrong. The serving dishes were outdated. It was constant, low-grade commentary disguised as help. I bit my tongue. I told myself she was just trying to belong. The first time she mentioned the garden was about a year after the wedding. We were having Sunday lunch on the patio. She looked out at the sprawling beds, the explosion of color, and she said, "You know, Bob, this is a phenomenal amount of square footage just for flowers." I laughed it off. I said, "Well, your mother-in-law didn't believe in phenomenal amounts of lawn." Chloe didn't laugh. She just nodded slowly, like she was calculating something. The comments became a pattern. "Do you have any idea what the water bill is for this? It must be a full-time job just weeding. This whole area could be such a beautiful entertainment space." Each time, Michael would stay quiet, focusing on his plate. Each time, I'd give the same answer. "It was Alina's. I keep it for her." Then last fall, the pressure changed. It became less about suggestion and more about declaration. Chloe and Michael announced they were expecting. I was overjoyed. I thought becoming grandparents would soften things, give us a new focus. I was wrong. For Chloe, it became the ultimate justification. We were visiting them at their new house, a modern place with a tiny, manicured yard. Chloe put a hand on her growing belly and said, "You know, Bob, when this little one comes, we're going to need a proper family home, somewhere with space, a real backyard for parties and playdates, not just a museum." The word hung in the air, museum. I felt it like a physical blow. I looked at Michael. He was studying a crack in their concrete patio. I said nothing. What was there to say? A month later, they asked me over for dinner. The conversation was friendly, normal, until the end. As I was putting on my coat, Chloe said almost casually, "Oh, by the way, we've been talking. We think it makes the most sense for us to move into your house. You have all that space you don't use. We could convert the den into a nursery. And honestly, Bob, at your age, shouldn't you be in something smaller, easier to manage, a nice condo?" She said it with a smile, like she was offering me a gift. My blood went cold. This wasn't about the garden anymore. This was about the house, the foundation, everything. I looked at my son. Michael, he cleared his throat. It could work, Dad. We could all be together. You wouldn't be alone. I told them I would think about it. It was the only thing I could say without saying the no that was screaming inside me. I went home that night and walked through every room. I sat in the living room where we'd brought Michael home from the hospital. I stood in the kitchen where Alina and I had danced to old records. This wasn't just a structure. It was a life, laid down in layers like sediment. I called Michael 2 days later. I told him, gently but firmly, that my answer was no. That this was my home and I intended to stay in it. He said he understood. Chloe did not understand. The next week she showed up at my door alone. She was all business. She had printouts, market analyzers showing how much the house had appreciated, floor plans she'd drawn up for a multi-generational redesign. She talked about equity, efficiency, the future. I listened. Then I said, Chloe, my answer is final. This is not a negotiation. The smile she gave me was thin, cold. We'll see, she said, and she left. For a few weeks it was quiet. I thought maybe somehow it was over. Then I came home from my weekly grocery trip on a Tuesday afternoon. There was a strange truck in my driveway, a flatbed with a small skip loader on it. I heard the noise before I saw it, a mechanical growl and the sound of tearing roots. I ran to the back of the house. The sight, it's something I will see for the rest of my life. The skip loader's metal claw was in the air, dripping black soil and tangled roots. A mangled bush of white iceberg roses was caught in its teeth. Chloe was standing off to the side, directing a man in a hard hat. Half of Alina's garden was already gone, reduced to a raw, gaping wound of mud and splinters. I don't remember shouting, I must have. The machinery stopped. Chloe turned to me, utterly calm. Bob, you're back early. We're surprising you. We're starting the patio. It's going to be fabulous. I was trembling. I pointed at the devastation. You did this without asking? She shrugged, a little gesture of impatience. You were never going to say yes. And this garden is a liability. It's a waste. We're giving you a usable space. You'll thank us later. I looked at the man in the hard hat. Get off my property now. He looked from me to Chloe. Chloe's face hardened. We have a contract. We're finishing the job. That's when I did the only thing I could think to do. I walked to my shed, took out my old toolbox, and pulled out the heaviest wrench I owned. I walked back and stood directly in front of the skip loader. The next thing you dig up, I said, my voice eerily steady, will be me. The operator shut the machine off. He got down. Lady, I'm not getting paid enough for this. He and his partner loaded their equipment back onto the flatbed and left. Chloe stared at me, her face a mask of pure fury. She didn't say a word. She just got in her car and sped away. I stood there in the silence, surrounded by the ruins, the smell of crushed petals and violated earth. I sank to my knees in the mud, picking up a broken stem of the Mr. Lincoln rose, its velvety bloom now trampled. That's when I saw it, a glint of metal in the torn-up hole where the white iceberg had been, not a root, not a rock, a smooth gray corner buried deep. I started digging with my hands, the mud caking under my nails. It was a safe, a small, fireproof safe. Alina's initials were etched into the top, faint but unmistakable. She had buried her secret under her most cherished rose, and the key was around my neck, on the chain I'd never taken off, right next to my wedding ring. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely fit the key. It turned with a solid, oiled click. The smell that came out was old paper, cold metal, and her perfume, a ghost in a steel box. I lifted the contents out into the dim evening light, sitting there in the mud beside my wife's grave. There were 3 things: a velvet pouch heavy and lumpy, a thin manila folder crisp and dry, and a single envelope sealed with my name written in her hand, for Robert, when the garden is gone. I opened the pouch first. It wasn't just jewelry. It was her asterisk jewelry, the pieces she never wore, the ones she told me were in a safety deposit box, her grandmother's emerald brooch, the diamond earrings from her mother, a platinum and sapphire Art Deco bracelet I'd never seen before, and at the bottom, loose, were 23 gold American Eagle coins, a small fortune buried 6 feet under her roses. Why here and not in a bank? The folder held documents, photocopies of bank statements, but not from our joint account. They were from an account in her name only at a different bank. The statements spanned 15 years. I watched the balance grow, deposit by quiet deposit, from a few thousand to over $275,000. A secret savings account. My engineer's mind started running numbers. Her modest salary from the botanical garden, the small inheritance from her aunt. She'd been skimming carefully, consistently, saving for what? Then there were other papers, printouts of emails, letters, legal correspondence. I shuffled through them, my heart hammering against my ribs. They were all about a woman named Chloe Ann Pritchard, but that wasn't my daughter-in-law's maiden name. Her maiden name was Walker. According to these documents, Chloe Ann Pritchard had been involved in a civil lawsuit in another state over a decade ago, a lawsuit filed by an elderly couple named Arthur and Marie Higgins. They'd taken in a boarder, a young woman named Chloe Pritchard, who had, over the course of a year, allegedly convinced Arthur to add her name to his investment accounts, siphoned funds, and left them nearly bankrupt. The case was settled out of court. The documents included a grainy photocopy of a driver's license. The face was younger, the hair different, but the eyes, they were Chloe's eyes. My Chloe. The world tilted. I felt the cold mud seep through my pants, but I couldn't move. Elena had known. She had known, and she had gathered proof, and she had hidden it here. She hadn't trusted banks or lawyers or even me with this. She buried it in the one place she knew was sacred, the one place she thought no one would ever violate. The last item was the letter. I broke the seal with a dirty thumbnail. My dearest Robert, if you are reading this, then the garden is gone. And if the garden is gone, then she has finally done it. I am so sorry I couldn't tell you this while I was alive. I tried a dozen times, but the words wouldn't come. You looked at our son with such hope when he brought her home. You saw the happiness in his eyes, and I saw a ghost. 2 months before Michael introduced us, a colleague at the garden, Margaret, showed me a newsletter from a senior advocacy group. There was a small article about the Higgins case, a cautionary tale. It had a photo. I recognized the girl immediately from the pictures Michael had on his phone. I made copies. I started digging. Quietly. The woman who befriended our son was not Chloe Walker. She was Chloe Pritchard. She changed her name after the settlement, which included a non-disclosure agreement. The Higginses were silenced. She walked away. I confronted her once. I asked her calmly over tea about her past. She looked me dead in the eye and told me I was mistaken, that it was a case of mistaken identity. She was so cool, Robert, so practiced. There was no fear, only a quiet warning. She said, it would break Michael's heart to hear such an ugly fictional story. Some things are better left buried, don't you think? I knew then she was a predator. I knew she was after the life we built. The equity in this house, the stability, everything. But I had no proof strong enough to show Michael without destroying his faith in me. He was in love, so I did the only thing I could. I started my own secret. I diverted money. I collected these documents. I bought this safe. I buried it under the white iceberg, the rose for our purest love, because I knew that as long as that rose lived, this truth was safe. And I knew that if she ever tried to take what was ours, she would come for the garden first. It was my testament, my anchor. The jewelry is yours. The money is yours. Use it to protect yourself, and if you can, to protect our son. I love you. I have always loved you. Forgive me for keeping this burden. Yours always, Elena. The paper was blurring. I wasn't crying. I was beyond that. I was in a silent, howling vacuum. The pieces slammed together. Chloe's immediate focus on the house's value, her disdain for the useless garden, her ruthless push to move in. It wasn't about family. It wasn't even about a patio. It was about possession, control. She wanted the deed, the equity, the legacy. And the garden, with its buried truth, was the one thing standing in her way. So she decided to literally rip it out by the roots. I didn't sleep that night. I cleaned the safe and its contents. I hid them in a new place, not in the house. I took pictures of every document with my phone, and then I did what Elena couldn't. I called my son. He came over the next morning alone. He looked weary, defeated. Dad, about the garden, Chloe, just under a lot of stress with the pregnancy. She didn't mean. I cut him off. I placed the folder on the kitchen table, the one from the safe. Sit down, Michael. I need you to look at something. I walked him through it, the bank statements. Your mother had a secret account. She was hiding money. His eyes widened in confusion. Then I showed him the lawsuit documents, the photo. I watched his face as he read the allegations: financial exploitation, undue influence, fraud. I saw the denial first, then the slow, dawning horror as he matched the details to the woman he married. The timeline fit. The move to our state right after the settlement. The name change. This is fake. This is some kind of sick joke. His voice was a whisper. It's from your mother's safe, Michael. She buried it under the roses. She knew. She's known for years. Why wouldn't she tell me? He asked, his voice breaking. Because she loved you, and she saw what I refused to see, that you wouldn't have believed her. You would have chosen Chloe, just like you've been choosing her over me for the past year. He flinched like I'd struck him. He stared at the grainy photo for a long, long time. When he finally looked up, his eyes were hollow. What do I do? You protect your child, I said. That's your job now. Get a lawyer, separate your finances, secure your assets before she does it to you. He left with the copies, looking like a man walking to his own execution. I felt no victory, only a profound, aching grief. For Alina, who carried this alone, for Michael, whose life was just shattered, and for myself, facing a war I never wanted. The silence lasted 3 days. Then the storm hit. It started with a text from Chloe, not an apology, a legal threat. You have until 5 p.m. tomorrow to return my property. The items you stole from the garden site are rightfully mine as the acting property manager. Failure to comply will result in immediate police involvement and a lawsuit for theft and conversion. She was brazen. She was claiming Alina's secret hoard as her own, simply because she'd bulldozed the ground above it. The absolute audacity took my breath away. I didn't respond. I called my attorney, Susan Park, the same one I'd used for my will after Alina died. I told her everything. I emailed her the pictures of the documents and the letter. Susan listened, her tone turning razor-sharp. Robert, this is beyond a property dispute. This is potential criminal fraud. The buried assets complicate things, but her attempt to claim them is telling. Do not engage. If the police contact you, refer them to me. We need to move proactively. The next evening, Michael showed up at my door again. He looked like he'd aged 10 years. She knows you talked to me. She found the copies I hid. She's furious. She says you're trying to destroy our family with forgeries. She's talking about getting a restraining order against you for harassment. What do you believe, Michael? I asked quietly. He couldn't meet my eyes. I don't know what to believe anymore. That hurt more than anything Chloe could have said. The seed of doubt, planted so deep by her, was still growing. 2 days later, a process server delivered a thick packet to my door. It was not from Chloe. It was from the County Department of Agging and Adult Services. It was a formal notice of an investigation. An anonymous report had been filed alleging that I, Robert, an elderly widower, was being financially exploited by a family member. The report claimed I was being manipulated into handing over property and assets, and that I was living in unsafe, squalid conditions due to cognitive decline. It requested a full assessment of my competence and a review of my finances. I read it twice, my hands steady but my insides ice. This was her masterstroke. She was using the system, the very system meant to protect people like the Higginses, to attack me, to have me declared incompetent, to get a court-appointed guardian, to take control without ever having to buy the house. It was elegant, ruthless, and terrifying. I called Susan, my voice barely under control. She was silent for a moment. Okay, she said, her voice calm and focused. Now we know the battlefield. This is a guardianship petition play. It's a nuclear option. We need to fight this on 2 fronts, discrediting the petition with evidence of your soundness and going on the offensive with what we know about her. How do we do that? I asked. First, she said, you submit to their evaluation, welcome it, be the sharp, retired engineer you are. Second, we take your wife's evidence and we use it to file a civil suit of our own, for intentional infliction of emotional distress, for the destruction of property, and for a declaratory judgment that she has no claim to any assets found on your property. We expose her. We make her past a matter of public record in our asterisk case before she can use the secrecy of a probate court to her advantage. It was a declaration of total war. I hung up and looked out at the ravaged garden, the gash of earth where the safe had been. Alina's anchor was gone. Now I was adrift in a legal and emotional battle I never saw coming. The foundation of my family was cracked, and I was about to find out if it would hold or if it would all come crashing down, burying us all in the rubble. The evaluation from Adult Services was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. I prepared for it like it was a professional engineering review, because in a way it was. They were assessing the structural integrity of my mind. A pleasant woman named Linda and a taciturn man named David arrived. They asked about my daily routines, my finances, my health. I showed them my meticulously organized files, tax returns, investment statements, the maintenance schedule for the house. I walked them through the garden's irrigation system I designed and installed myself after Alina died. I discussed load-bearing walls and roof truss repairs I'd supervised. I was courteous, precise, and utterly transparent. Then Linda gently asked about family tensions. I didn't volunteer Alina's letter or the safe. I simply stated that there was a disagreement with my daughter-in-law regarding property use and that I had retained legal counsel. I gave them Susan's card. I could see the shift in their posture. The anonymous report had described a confused, frail old man being preyed upon. They were sitting with a retired engineer who could quote municipal building codes from memory. As they left, Linda gave me a small, professional smile. "Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Henderson. We'll be in touch." Susan filed our lawsuit the next day. The civil complaint was a hammer. It named Chloe for intentional infliction of emotional distress, trespass, conversion of property, claiming she'd tried to steal the contents of the safe, and sought a judicial declaration that she had no interest in my home or assets. The key part, the explosive part, was Attachment A, a summarized but detailed account of the Higgins case with the photocopied driver's license. We were not suing her for her past. We were using her past to prove her pattern, her motive, her malicious intent in the present. It was now a public court record. The reaction was swift and volcanic. Chloe's lawyer, a slick, aggressive man named Carl Reed, fired back with motions to seal the case, claiming we were engaging in character assassination. He filed a counterclaim for defamation and for the return of misappropriated heirlooms. He also, ominously, amended his response to include Michael as a necessary party, trying to drag my son directly into the legal crossfire. The battle lines were drawn in formal, numbered paragraphs. Then the unexpected variable shifted. Michael called me, his voice thick with a new kind of fear. "Dad, Chloe's been admitted to the hospital, blood pressure, they're talking about preeclampsia, they might have to induce early." All the legal fury suddenly meant nothing. This was my grandchild. My son's wife, however monstrous her actions, was in danger. I told him I was on my way. At the hospital, the tension was a physical presence. Michael looked shattered. Chloe, in a hospital bed, attached to monitors, was pale and furious. When she saw me, her eyes narrowed. "Get out," she whispered. "I'm here for Michael," I said quietly, "and for the baby." I turned to my son. "Whatever you need, whatever she needs, the rest can wait." I stayed in the waiting room for hours. I brought Michael coffee. I didn't mention the lawsuit. I just existed as his father. Late that night, a nurse came out. They were going to induce. It was a long, agonizing 36 hours. I went home to sleep, but returned each morning. On the second day, as I sat reading a magazine, Michael slumped into the chair beside me. He looked like a ghost. "She's asking me to choose," he said, his voice hollow. "The lawyer says the case is a disaster, that your suit is going to ruin her. She says if I don't get you to drop it, and if I don't testify on her behalf about your declining state of mind, then she'll take the baby and I'll never see them. She says a court will give her everything because she's the mother." I felt the world drop away. This was the ultimate weapon, not a lawsuit, but the threat of severing a father from his child. "Michael," I said, choosing each word with care, "I cannot drop the suit. If I do, she wins. The guardianship petition goes forward. She gets control. But this choice she's giving you, that's not love, that's coercion. That's the same pattern, son, just with a higher price." He put his head in his hands. "I don't know what's true anymore. I look at her in that bed and I see the woman I love. Then I read that lawsuit and I see a stranger. I'm so tired, Dad." Before I could answer, a doctor emerged, smiling. "Mr. Henderson, you have a son. Mother and baby are stable." Little William was born tiny but fierce. Seeing him in Michael's arms, the resemblance to Alina around the eyes, was a punch of pure, disorienting joy amidst the chaos. Chloe, exhausted, allowed me a brief visit. She didn't speak to me. She just watched me with cold, calculating eyes over the head of our newborn grandson. The war was on hold, but it wasn't over. It had just gained a hostage. A week after they went home, the report from Adult Services arrived. It was a complete vindication. They found no evidence of cognitive decline, financial exploitation, or unsafe living conditions. They noted the subject was highly articulate, organized, and fully capable of managing his affairs. They formally closed the investigation. It was a victory, but a shallow one. Chloe's legal strategy had taken a hit, but her personal strategy, the siege of my son, was intensifying. Then Susan called with new information. "We've been served with their expert reports," she said. "They have a forensic document examiner. He's prepared to testify that the photocopies of the Higgins lawsuit documents are forgeries, that the paper stock is wrong for the time period, the font is inconsistent. He's calling your wife's evidence a fabrication." I felt a cold dread, but it's not. Elena would never. "Robert, I know," Susan interrupted, "but they're creating reasonable doubt. If they can convince a judge that your central piece of evidence is fake, the rest of our case about her pattern collapses. It becomes a he said, she said about a garden dispute." We were losing the narrative. Chloe was painting herself as a young mother being persecuted by a bitter, manipulative father-in-law with forged documents. I spent a sleepless night staring at Elena's letter. "Forgive me for keeping this burden." The burden was now crushing me. The breakthrough came from an unexpected place. Desperate, I called the only person I could think of, Margaret, Elena's old colleague who had first shown her the newsletter. I hadn't spoken to her in years. I explained the situation, my voice cracking with exhaustion. There was a long silence on the line. "Elena was terrified of that woman," Margaret said softly. "She talked to me about it just once. She said she felt like she was building a dam against a flood. Robert, I think I might have something. After Elena died, I was clearing out some old office files. I found a manila envelope with your name on it in her desk drawer. I meant to give it to you, but with the funeral and everything, it slipped my mind. I'm so sorry, I still have it." My heart stopped. "What's in it?" "I don't know, I never opened it. It felt private." I drove to Margaret's house that afternoon. The envelope was nondescript. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a phone number and a name. Arthur Higgins agreed to speak if needed. And a short note from Elena, "Robert, if it ever comes to it, he's willing to break the NDA. The settlement was for silence, but not if it enables her to hurt another family. He's a good man. Use this." I clutched the paper. This was the keystone, the living witness. Susan's voice was electric when I told her. "This changes everything. A witness from the prior case willing to testify to her pattern of behavior blows their forgery theory out of the water. We need to contact him immediately." But when I called the number, it was disconnected. Arthur Higgins had moved. The trail, so vividly alive a moment before, was cold. We were back to searching for a ghost from a decade-old case, with a trial date now looming on the calendar. The pressure was a physical weight. My sleep was gone. I'd walked the ruined garden at night, the moon casting stark shadows on the torn earth, feeling Elena's absence like a missing limb. It was there in the mud that I had the thought. The safe was Elena's secret. But what if she had another? What if she left a trail a fellow gardener would understand? I went to her gardening notebooks, not looking for planting dates, but for anything out of place. A circled number, a strange abbreviation. On the page for the white iceberg rose next to the note about spring feeding, she had written 3 letters, AHLC. I'd always assumed it was a fertilizer brand. Now I wondered. Arthur Higgins, Lancaster County, that's where the Higgins lawsuit was filed. A frantic online search later, combing through old county property records, I found it. Arthur Higgins had sold his house in Lancaster County 5 years ago. The sale was handled by a realtor named Laura Carson. LC Laura Carson. I found her office. With a trembling hand, I called, posing as a relative trying to locate Arthur for a family matter. She was reluctant, protective of client privacy. But when I mentioned it was regarding a matter of justice connected to the Higgins case, her tone changed. "He and Marie moved to be near their daughter in Arizona," she said quietly. "After everything, they just wanted peace. But he told me once he regretted the silence. He said letting her disappear felt like failing the next people she'd find." She gave me an email address. That night I wrote to Arthur Higgins. I told him who I was. I told him about the garden, the safe, the lawsuit, the grandchild. I attached a copy of Elena's letter, the part about her knowing. I hit send and entered a new kind of purgatory, waiting. The reply came 3 days later. It was brief. Mr. Henderson, your wife was a kind woman. She wrote to me years ago. I am sorry her fears came true. I am old and my Marie is gone now. The NDA doesn't matter anymore. I will testify. Tell your lawyer to contact me. I read those words, and for the first time in months, I took a full, deep breath. We had our witness. The dam Elena built was about to hold. The battlefield was set. All that was left was the final, brutal confrontation, the trial. The morning of the trial dawned clear and cold. I put on the same suit I'd worn to Elena's funeral. It felt like armor. Susan met me on the courthouse steps. Remember, she said, this is about patterns. We show the court who she is. The garden, the safe, it's all evidence of the pattern. Inside, the room was quiet, formal. Chloe sat with her lawyer, Carl Reed. She wore a simple, modest dress, the picture of a wronged young mother. Michael was not there. He'd texted me that morning, I can't be in that room. I'm sorry, I love you. My heart ached for him, but I understood. The judge, a stern woman named Judge Alvarez, called the court to order. Susan laid out our case with surgical precision. She described the garden as a living memorial, the calculated destruction, the discovery of the safe. She entered Elena's letter into evidence. Carl Reed objected vehemently, calling it hearsay, but Judge Alvarez allowed it, noting it spoke to state of mind and motive. Then Susan presented the documents from the safe, linking them to the Higgins case. Reed's expert, the document examiner, took the stand. He spoke confidently about paper stock and fonts, calling the copies highly suspect forgeries. Then Susan called her rebuttal witness. The plaintiff calls Mr. Arthur Higgins. The side door opened. An elderly man with a stooped frame but clear eyes walked slowly to the stand. Chloe's face, for the first time, lost its composed mask. It went pale, then rigid. Arthur Higgins took the oath. Susan guided him gently through his story. He described the bright, helpful young woman named Chloe Pritchard who moved into their basement apartment after answering an ad. How she'd become like a daughter, helping with groceries, driving Marie to appointments. How she'd gradually started talking about their finances, expressing concern. How she'd offered to help organize their accounts. The slow draining of their savings, the promises of investments that never materialized. The moment they confronted her and the cold, dismissive stranger who looked back at them. The settlement, the silence they'd agreed to for a fraction of what she'd taken just to make it stop. Can you identify that woman in the courtroom today? Susan asked. Arthur Higgins pointed a steady finger directly at Chloe. That's her, she's older, but that's Chloe Pritchard. The eyes are the same, empty. Carl Reed's cross-examination was frantic, trying to paint Higgins as a bitter old man with a faulty memory. But Arthur was unshakable. He recalled specific dates, amounts, the pattern of behavior with calm, devastating clarity. The document examiner's testimony crumbled into dust. The pattern was real. It was in the room. When it was Chloe's turn to take the stand, the performance was masterful. She cried. She spoke of her love for Michael, her fear of a hostile father-in-law, her desire to create a beautiful space for her new family. She claimed she'd only wanted to refresh an overgrown garden, that the safe's contents were a mystery to her, that we were crucifying her with fabricated stories from a painful chapter in her youth that she'd put behind her. She looked at the jury, her voice trembling. I'm a mother now. All I want is to protect my son from this hate. But Susan had the kill shot. On redirect, she approached the bench with emotion. Judge Alvarez nodded. Susan turned to Chloe. Ms. Walker, or should I say Ms. Pritchard, you testified you knew nothing about the safe's contents. Is that correct? Absolutely nothing, Chloe said, dabbing her eyes. Susan then entered a new exhibit into evidence. It was a record from a local safe and lock company, a service call dated 8 months prior to my address. The work order stated, customer inquired about drilling open buried, locked safe in garden bed, advised against due to potential damage to contents. Customer declined service. The customer's signature was a familiar, looping script, Chloe's signature. You inquired about drilling open the safe 8 months before you hired the bulldozer, Susan said, her voice icy calm. So you knew it was there, you knew what was in it, and you decided to destroy the garden not for a patio, but to destroy the evidence. Isn't that the truth? The courtroom was utterly silent. Chloe stared at the paper, her mouth a thin line. All the performance drained away, replaced by a flat, cold fury. She said nothing. She didn't have to. The truth was sitting there in the quiet. Judge Alvarez didn't need long to deliberate. She found in my favor on all counts. The destruction of the garden was willful trespass and property damage. Her attempt to claim the safe's contents was conversion. Her actions, coupled with the testimony of Arthur Higgins, established a pattern of intentional, malicious conduct aimed at financial and emotional exploitation. She was ordered to pay restitution for the garden's value, assessed at a shockingly high number by a horticultural expert, plus my legal fees. Furthermore, Judge Alvarez issued a permanent restraining order, barring Chloe from my property and from contacting me except through lawyers. She also, in a rare move, recommended the findings be forwarded to the district attorney's office for review for possible criminal charges of fraud. It was a total, crushing legal victory, but walking out of that courtroom, I felt no triumph, only a profound, weary sadness. The structure had held, but the cost was everywhere. The aftermath was a quiet earthquake. Chloe moved out of the house she shared with Michael the next day. She took William. The threat she'd made in the hospital became real. She filed for divorce and full custody, claiming Michael was complicit in a family that had mentally abused her. My son was plunged into a second, even more brutal legal battle, this time for his child. He came to live with me. The house that had felt too empty for years now felt too full of his grief. We barely spoke for days. We just existed in the same space, two shattered men. One evening, I found him in the backyard, staring at the scarred earth. "I loved her, Dad," he said, his voice raw. "How could I have been so blind?" "You saw what she wanted you to see," I said. "Love makes you want to believe the best. Your mother, she saw what she was. She tried to protect us both." Weeks passed. The divorce proceedings were ugly, but Chloe, perhaps sensing the tide of evidence was against her again, or perhaps just exhausted, agreed to a settlement. Shared legal custody, significant child support, a clean break. It was not what Michael wanted, but it was what he could get. He was a father, but not a husband. He was free, but he was broken. One Saturday in early spring, I handed Michael a set of plans. They were my own drawings, drafted on my old engineering table. "What's this?" he asked. "A rebuild," I said. "Not just a garden, a foundation." It was a design to regrade and restore the backyard. But in the center, where Alina's roses had been, the plans showed a simple, graceful courtyard of native flagstone, and in the very center, a new planting bed, a memorial garden within the ruin. We would use the restitution money from Chloe and a portion of Alina's hidden savings to fund it. We worked on it together that entire spring and summer. It was hard physical labor. We hauled stone, mixed mortar, turned soil. We didn't talk much, we just worked. Slowly, the raw wound in the earth began to heal under our hands. We planted new roses, but also resilient perennials, small trees for shade. In the center of the new courtyard, we placed a simple stone bench. On the back, we had a plaque engraved, "For Alina, who planted truth and whose love grows back." The final surprise came from Arthur Higgins. A package arrived one day, addressed to me. Inside was a small potted rose cutting. A note read, "This is a fragrant memory hybrid, Marie's favorite. She would want it to go in your new garden. Some things shouldn't be forgotten. Arthur." We planted it by the bench. It felt like a blessing from another wounded family, a thread of connection across the years. Michael eventually moved into an apartment closer to the city to be near his son for his custody days. He is healing. He sees a therapist. He is a devoted, careful father to William, fiercely protective in a new way. He comes over every other Sunday. We work in the garden. He asks me questions about his mother I never thought to answer before. The garden is different now. It's not the sprawling, romantic tapestry Alina cultivated. It is neater, more structured with stone and order, but it is alive. And in its center, in the quiet space we built, I feel her presence not as a ghost to be mourned, but as a foundation to be tended. She left me a hidden strength, not just in a safe, but in the truth she had the courage to bury and the faith that I would find it. The law saw a case about property and patterns, but it was really about memory, about what we choose to preserve when someone tries to erase it. You can bulldoze the roses, but you can't bulldoze the roots. They go deeper than any blade can reach. And if you're willing to do the hard work, to clear the rubble and tend the soil, they will send up new shoots. Stronger, maybe, different, certainly, but alive. I sit on that stone bench now with my coffee, and I watch the dappled light through the new leaves. I think of Elena, of Michael, of little William. I think of Arthur and Marie Higgins. We are all connected by the damage one person can do, and by the stubborn, quiet courage it takes to rebuild after. The foundation holds, not because it was never tested, but because it was tested and it held. People ask me sometimes if I regret not seeing the signs sooner, if I wish Elena had told me directly about Chloe's past. The truth is, I don't think in terms of regret anymore. I think in terms of load and capacity. We are all structures built to bear certain weights, the weight of love, of trust, of daily life. Elena saw a stress fracture I couldn't see, a flaw in the human material entering our family. She couldn't stop the load from being applied, but she quietly, secretly reinforced the foundation. She buried a keystone. This wasn't just about a garden or a safe or a lawsuit. It was about the quiet violence of erasure. Chloe didn't just want a patio. She wanted to overwrite a history she wasn't part of, to replace a living memory with a blank slate she could control. What she didn't understand is that real memories aren't stored in petals and stems. They're encoded in the care, in the years of attention, in the love that tends something fragile and makes it bloom. That can't be bulldozed. It can only be transferred. I learned that we protect what we love not just by building walls, but by knowing where the weak points are. Elena's greatest gift wasn't the money in that safe. It was the proof. The cold, hard evidence that cut through the emotional fog and showed my son in a court of law a pattern too clear to ignore. She gave us the tool to break the cycle. In the end, that's what a foundation is for, not to never shake, but to give you something solid to rebuild upon when the shaking stops. The story of the bulldozed garden and the buried safe feels like a fable, but it's built on the most ordinary of materials: a family, a house, a plot of land. It's a reminder that the most epic battles often happen in the most intimate spaces, and that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a geology of its own. It waits, under rose bushes, under silence, under years of pretense. And when the machinery of deceit finally bites into the earth, it's the truth that strikes back, hard and unyielding. So tend your gardens, whatever they are, your relationships, your principles, the memories of those you've loved. Tend them with care, and don't be afraid to bury your truths in sacred ground. You never know when someone might come with a bulldozer, or when you might need to prove what really grew there. Thank you for listening. If you found meaning in this story of what was buried and what grew back, consider subscribing for more documentaries about the hidden foundations of our lives. I'm Robert Henderson. Until next time.